Accutron Watches presents. From New York City, this is the Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture with your hosts, Bill McCuddy, Scott Alexander, and David Graver. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
I remember my dad told me, if you want to be the best, work for the best. And that really, I really took that to heart, and I knew Ralph Lauren is who I wanted to be.
The person you heard at the top of the show was today's guest, American fashion designer Todd Snyder. But up first, the very unfashionable Bill McCuddy, along with writer Scott Alexander and editor David Graver, here for a brand new episode of the Accutron Show. Stay tuned.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our iconic Space View 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open dial design combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed again. The Accutron Space View 2020.
Scott, how do you define style?
Whatever I do that's not just putting on a t-shirt and
Yeah.
if I go any just half step beyond that, I call it style.
Okay, and when was your first sense of having that as a
Middle
kid?
school.
Middle school.
Yeah. When it was like the moment where you're like, other kids care about what I'm wearing.
Yeah.
I care
They had
about
no
what they think,
uniforms
and
at
so
your
they
school
think-
when
well,
you
no,
were a
when I
kid?
was very young, I did, but then middle school, a whole different deal,
Right.
And then that's where I started wanting to look good.
I started with
And ever
Scott
since,
because
I look amazing.
we won't go by today. Graver, you write about style.
I
You
do.
embody style. You study it at Cool Hunting. It's part of your beat.
Sure.
When was the first time you said, "I feel stylish"?
The womb.
It was when I moved to New York City. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't pay attention to clothing. I actually didn't care. I was a very basic dresser, and it was when I moved to New York I learned that clothing can be a way to express your personality. It could be a way to sort of channel your feelings and your thoughts. It could be
You
a way
had a
to
personality
defy your
before you
body
got-
or work with your body.
Okay, but you had a personality as a kid. You just didn't let clothing define it.
It's
any way.
true. It's true. But I didn't know. I was so.
You caught on quick,
I'm
though.
from Connecticut.
Yeah.
I wore khaki pants.
It's funny you say khaki
I
pants
wore khakis.
because I wore khakis
Today.
in but in Traverse City, Michigan, in 1972 or 3, when I was in high school, it was the only two people that wore khakis were me and the janitor. And kids up there in jeans and stuff would go, "Oh, look who joined the Navy." I mean, like, what? I mean, khakis were this thing that not everybody wore for a long time, and then all of a sudden, everybody did. Our guest today worked at the Gap, at J. Crew. They sell khakis.
He knows his way around some khakis.
He knows all the colors, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the collaborations that he's done, what he thinks defines style. He'll have a little better perspective on it.
Well, and
than
you
we
talked
will.
about coming from Traverse City or coming from Connecticut or coming from Texas. He's coming from Iowa.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
that's what I love about New York. It's like everybody can come here and just go crazy.
Worked in Des Moines, Iowa, at a men's store at a very young age, where people probably go in and buy, one suit for the rest of their life
Right.
to get married in and buried in, and that's it.
And then more than a decade ago, launched an eponymous label that became one of the hottest menswear brands in New York City for a very long time. It still is one of the hottest menswear brands. Going to a Todd Snyder show or presentation is like going to a family reunion with fashion writers across the city because everyone is there because everyone wants to see what Todd is doing.
Right.
He worked with Ralph Lauren. He's worked with some of the iconic brands. His name is on the outside or inside of a lot
Worked
of
with
things.
Moby.
You're wearing Moby. Yeah. Remind me to ask him about that. Listen, it's a fashionable. We are not fashionably late. We are on time for the very fashionable Todd Snyder, and he joins us on the Accutron Show right after this.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection, reimagined for a new generation. The Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Todd Snyder, you're fashionably on time. Welcome to the Accutron Show, and are happy that you can join us today. What we were talking about before you came along is, what is style? And we were sort of having a three-guy arm wrestle over it. What is your definition of style?
My definition of style has always kind of been, it really kind of defines you as a a tastemaker, as a person. I think everybody kind of lives comfortably in their own clothes, and style to me is kind of the next level of that. Somebody who just wears a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt could be very cool with the right watch, with the right shoe. Steve McQueen is the one I always think of.
Do you think the role of dressing up has changed over the last year? I mean, the pandemic changed a lot of the way people perceive style and dressing in the morning. Has that changed what you do?
Certainly. I think I travel a lot more than I ever have. I think all of us have kind of this revenge travel
It's
happening.
true.
And we're all kind of dressing different, which is nice. Certainly as a business owner, it's always nice to have people coming in your store. But there's, for whatever reason, I think people are ready to turn the page and kind of put the past behind and are trying new things. And at least, for us in our business, we're seeing a lot of new customers coming in, a lot of existing customers that are kind of, wanting to do something different than what they did the last 2-3 years.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we can actually pivot and start with who you are and how you got into fashion, how you transformed from a high school football player into such an influential fashion designer here in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I was actually a basketball player, not a football player, but totally fine. I love basketball, but I did play football, but I would always consider myself a basketball player. But yeah, I grew up in Iowa. I was born and raised there. Both of my parents, came from farming families, and I always liked clothes. I just remember always kind of being a little bit of a black sheep of the family. I always liked, clothes, and I remember I used to spend all my summer money on clothes, and I kind of just followed my passion. And my father was an engineer, and my mother is a designer, interior designer, as well as she was an art teacher when I was in school, and always encouraged me to pursue art. And I just remember clothes for me were kind of the easy way to get girls' attention, and I was good at it.
Did you
The
sew
clothes
them?
part,
Did you make them something, or you're in terms
uh,
of
just dressing well. I mean,
right?
dressing well,
Right.
and I've always said this, and it may not be appropriate, but if you want to get laid, dressing well always is the best
It's true.
solution.
It's true.
Not
that
appropriate.
applies
That's
to
our
any.
poll quote now. You kidding?
But it's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
it,
good
it, it
business to be
worked.
in, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. I mean, it's really, for me, it was just kind of one of those things. I was always good at sports, and but for me, dressing better was for me a talent, because I paid attention to things and I really studied it. And then as I got to college, got into architecture and got into engineering at first, and I was kind of like, oh gosh, where's this going? And I ended up switching. I was working in a menswear store called Bedowers in Des Moines, Iowa, and kind of really fell in love with clothes. I think I spent more money than I made
Yeah.
every summer. So that didn't net out well. I definitely dressed very well. And then, I started working in the tailor shop. Slowly started moving, and I switched majors. I got into fashion design at Iowa State, and there's actually a program there. And I was like, I couldn't graduate fast enough. I was in school for about 6 years without a master's, but I did get a fashion design degree. And that's what brought me here. And I used to make my own shirts. I used to make my own patterns. when I got here and just really got into, kind of the craft of making product. I used to make shirts. I used to make pants. I used to make
How do you go
drapes.
from just somebody making shirts in their living room to like having a design shop? Like what that leap seems like you learned your trade, you came here, you're like, let's go. How it seems like there's a big gap. Like what's that launch pad look like?
Well, I mean, I've been in the industry. It was 92 when I graduated. I've been in the industry a long time. And I remember my dad told me, if you want to be the best, work for the best. And that really, I really took that to heart. And I knew Ralph Lauren is who I wanted to be. I remember reading his book, you know, early 90s, and was like, I didn't know you could do this for a living. And was like, that's what I want to do. And then I started working in the industry. I worked for him early on. It was my first like internship, and then I got to work at J. Crew. And I was there in like 93 to 95, and then I went to Gap, where I got to work with Mickey Drexler, and then I went back to Ralph Lauren, and but I worked for a lot of people in design, and but always, never burning a bridge and always keeping a great relationship, because I actually returned to each place before going on my own. I'd worked at J. Crew twice.
Oh, okay.
And I worked at Gap twice, and I worked at Ralph's twice, which was, I didn't realize I was doing this, but when I was recounting it to a friend, I was like, this is incredible. But it was all about,
You're the Noah of designers. You go every place twice. What's the best piece of advice Ralph Lauren gave you?
Well, I mean, I never really had much direct contact. Jerry Lauren was very influential in my career. I think as everybody who worked in design there. Ralph was always, doing other things. He's very busy, but really kind of just always sharpening and refining the blade is kind of what Jerry would always say, and making sure that you're constantly creating that edge and creating that making that product as best it can be. That was really kind of, they would obsess over the small details, and that's really kind of what I took from that.
You're a New Yorker. You're speaking to a table of New Yorkers. What does it mean to be a New York-based fashion brand?
I mean, it's sometimes hard to believe. For me, I kind of put my head down and very kind of humble about what I do, and I love what I do. It's a craft, and I just got back from a trip from Italy and was in the mills that we work with there, and it just was so inspiring, and just seeing people there making your fabric, and they have the same amount of passion as you do, and their love for family and food and wine is equal to mine, and obviously they know it better. So all of it together just makes me feel really blessed. And thinking about when I came here 30 years ago and thinking about what I wanted to be and becoming that is just incredible. It's a dream come true for me. I never thought I always dreamt about having my own line, but I never thought I was capable of doing it. And I think, working at J. Crew back in 2005 to 2009 really just kind of set the stage for me to do it.
We've seen AI transform all these different industries, and it feels like fashion should be like way down the list of stuff that's going to get transformed. But I'm wondering, are there ways in which designers are starting to use those techniques of artificial intelligence, of stuff that human brains can't do, or that the machines can do better?
I mean, at first I was really kind of reticent to think, oh yeah, that's something I would do. I was kind of very skeptical of it, but I have to be honest with you, the more I try out Chat GBT, and it's kind of scary how simple and how good it is. Like I have Genie on my phone, which is a Chat GBT app, and I asked it to give me a mission statement for Todd Snyder, and I was like, oh my God. I've been trying to write a mission statement for 10 years, and this thing like blew me out of the water.
Fired the whole staff.
I did. Close.
Yeah.
In full disclosure, Todd, we should tell you that we are holograms here today. This isn't really us. Can you walk into that store in Des Moines where you started and buy a Todd Snyder design today?
I wish. They went out of business during the pandemic, and for a moment I was thinking about, taking it on and doing something, and it just didn't seem doable.
But you
Just
have had that oh my god moment where you've walked into a store and there's something you designed 9 months ago.
Yeah, 100. I think the big thing for me is, we don't sell wholesale, but I think the big thing for me is seeing customers wear it. I was in Europe and I saw some people wearing our product, and I was like, oh my god, I did that. Um, it's super, you know, it's just a great compliment when you see customers buying your product. I do get nervous, and it is emotionally hard because when I used to do wholesale, I would have to leave the room. It was just too much for me to hear people. Why didn't they buy that? Why are they?
Right.
It's just
Right.
like
That'll never
it's too
sell.
much.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So
Damn it, Saul. Right.
One of my favorite things about your brand and the work that you do exists in your myriad collaborations between the FootJoy and New Balance and DS Durga. I love the way you apply your aesthetic and your values to other brands. Can you talk to me about the role of collaboration in your business?
yeah, collaboration was really. I started doing it at J. Crew back in like 2006, 2007, and it really. I mean, I got the idea from the Japanese, really. They were so good at doing it, and I knew, being at menswear at J. Crew, we were always kind of in the basement, or we're in the back of the catalog. We didn't get a lot of marketing dollars, and I thought, it'd be really clever is if we did something with someone who's a little more famous, like you know Red Wing or Timex, because everybody knows who Timex is. And that was kind of like my little brief idea there. And I always knew if I was going to do my own thing, I would kind of lean on that same idea. And Champion was the first one I did when I went out on my own, and that really kind of set the stage. And I kind of do it for multiple reasons. One, it's a great way to market your brand. No one knows who Todd Snyder is, 10, 11 years ago. Everybody pretty much knew who Champion was. Second, it's just really awesome to be able to work with other creatives. And I love kind of understanding, and I didn't realize this at first, but I really enjoy working with other people and, you know, us kind of together getting to a new place. And that for me is exciting. I really enjoy. It's a passion of mine. It's something that it's hard to get there without somebody else kind of pushing you, and you push them and you pull, and
Hmm.
it's a really good collaborative effort, and that's what I really love doing. And then thirdly, it's great financially because it is, we typically sell out of the things we work on together, and we truly work on them together. It's not like a lot of people do collaborations, just slap their name on it. I sit down with their creative teams. We work on a whole creative brief when we do the photo shoot, and we really try to go to a new place versus me just kind of putting all of my design. I think about my business in a lot of different ways. From a customer's point of view, you know I have multiple age groups that I sell to, so I think about like Champion is but a little bit younger sensibility, and FootJoy is a little bit more kind of in our medium age, and the um things like they've done with J Press or is kind of a cool kind of street thing that appeals to both older and younger. So I'm always kind of figuring out how to just keep customers kind of entertained and guessing what the next one's going to be, and have a lot of fun doing it.
I
You're
think
you're like Hyman Roth. You make money for his partners, and our partner is Accutron. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we have lots more questions for Todd Snyder, including what was his influence from the 1960s, the way Accutron was influenced and has brought out a new line. So we're going to take a little break. When we come back, more with the very stylish Todd Snyder. This is the Accutron Show.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our legacy collection, reviving some of the most memorable Accutron watches from the 60s and 70s. The Legacy Collection combines timeless design with the technical excellence of Swiss watchmaking, each limited to 600 individually numbered pieces. The Accutron Legacy Collection, inspired by the past, built for the future.
We're back with Todd Snyder talking all things fashionable. And before the break, you were talking about all the people that you've worked with or collaborated with and how successful that is. Do you think as a culture, we still rely on a designer's name to sell or a label, or are we moving more away from that?
I think we're moving more away from it. It's interesting when I look at the landscape today versus what it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago is a handful of designers, whether it was like Calvin or Donna Karan or Ralph Lauren. You had Nautica, you had Tommy Hilfiger. You think about American designers, you had Perry Ellis. Those were the ones that were kind of accepted to wear as a buyer, as someone wearing clothes. And today it's changed. I mean, it's hundreds of people, and I find sneaker world is kind of a good place to look at, and looking at what it used to be dominated by Nike and Adidas and New Balance, and you had some other brands in there. But now today it's like you think about all these startup brands, whether it's On Sneakers or Hoka or what have you, that have big market share, that are growing quickly. And that never would have happened 5, 10 years ago. Same thing's happening in apparel. And I'm seeing a lot of brands that are either direct to consumer or startups. You go to any shopping area today and it's just mind boggling seeing all these new brands. There's probably 3 or 4 new active brands every year, trying to do what Lululemon does. And it's just interesting. It's really healthy, I think, for the business, because it keeps things regenerating and people with new ideas. I think the consumer is very open to new kind of discovery brands.
Was there a moment when you were first learning about design where you just had wait, what? Like your most sort of unexpected joy, surprise? Because it feels like fashion is so much about like delighting the customer with something that they weren't expecting. Was there a moment of the unexpected for you?
I think it is every season. And that's kind of what keeps me going, is like I really try to think about, even when I start to think, everything's boring, everything's been done, a new season comes about. And, for the longest time, since I was at J. Crew, we were always trying to get people into a slimmer suit and kind of a shrunken suit. And that's changed in the last 2 years. And that's the one big thing. It's nice to see it in menswear, where all of a sudden you start to see the ties widening, you start to see the suits relaxing. And I hadn't seen that since the 80s and 90s with Armani. And you're starting to see a return to kind of this more relaxed way of dressing. So there's always something every season that kind of just is like, oh, wow. And I always search for it, and I always think I'm not going to find it this season. And sure enough, I do.
Well, you need that. That's the fire in the furnace.
Exactly. And that's what the customers want. They don't want to buy, they have a closet full of same old. They want something that's maybe, a twist on what they have, or a few degrees different. There are customers that like things that are, very different, but the way I design is kind of, I think about a spectrum and where my customer sits. And I'm always thinking about, is this going to be too far for them? Is this not going to be far enough? And so that's what always challenges me.
How often do you look back into archives or the history of fashion or vintage fashion for inspiration?
That's kind of the secret of, I think, design in general. I think I learned that at Ralph Lauren. It's amazing how much, if you think about men's apparel, or apparel in general, but men's apparel especially, nothing's really changed that much in the last 100 years. We're all, guys are still wearing coats, they're still wearing shirts, they're still wearing trousers and a proper dress
Not
shoe
Bill.
and what have you.
No, I have no trousers on right now.
All
Wait,
right.
what?
All right.
No.
Just saying.
They're pants.
This is an
They're
honest,
pants.
it's honesty
They're
time.
pants.
Sorry.
Exactly.
We digress
But yeah,
easily on the Accutron Show.
that's good though. It's fun. But yeah, I mean, it's there's small little things that change here and there, and you can definitely look at certain things, whether it's like um, the shrunken suit with Tom Brown, or you see, certain trends like, Lululemon and activewear coming along, and those things you can definitely kind of put a pin in and recognize. But overall, it's still pretty much the same stuff. It's really how you put it together that makes it new.
Right.
And in menswear especially, I think it's important to kind of appreciate kind of the heritage and where things come from. And I've always been, I learned this at Ralph Lauren, really looking at the archives and looking back, to really go forward, because you always hear about people talking about, oh, it's all about the 80s now, or it's all about the 90s. And whether it's men's or women's, people are always looking at, the past. And that's, for me, I at first was a little like, really? That's how we do this? But there is so much that I think in fashion, especially, people like to have things that are somewhat familiar, and then they can kind of connect the dots.
So looking forward, do you go to science fiction movies and see them all running around in the jumpsuits in the year 2090 and go, that's never going to happen? Or do you think there is a
Or
time
is
when
next
we'll...
season jumpsuit season?
Yes, right. Did we just inspire you?
Yes, well, jumpsuits are trending. I mean, they're not going to be a big seller, but we did one last season and it blew out. But we only bought 50 pieces. But no, it's kind of a culmination of a lot of different things. Like, I look at everything from movies to, I always find it really interesting watching sci-fi movies and kind of seeing where things are going, or at least they think they're going. And the ones I'm always interested in are like, I watched Dune, and I thought that was a really just an interesting take on what the future would be like. But it's amazing how much was rooted in kind of a natural fibers and natural materials. And you glean stuff off of that. I look at architecture as a very good indicator, and I love how architects take all the materials, whether it's concrete or wood, and how they mix it and put it together that makes it different. And that for me is a great lesson on how to design, and cooking. I always use cooking as an
Oh,
analogy
wow.
in design, and how all the ingredients are fairly known, and it's how you put them together that makes them new. It's really kind of just kind of blending of all these things and trying to um, do something interesting that the customer is delighted with.
Todd, you started out originally in school studying finance, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I started off. I mean, the long story is, I started off in freshman engineering, did that for a year, and then I went to architecture, did that for a year, and then I switched to finance because I thought, you know what, it'll be a safe kind of decision. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to say I was a fashion designer. Growing up in Iowa, like saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a fashion designer."
Right.
There's definitely stigmas attached to that, and there still is, unfortunately. But I definitely was insecure with
Whereas in New
myself,
York, you say
and
like, "I'm going to go into finance." People are like, I'm so sorry. I can't do
exactly,
that anymore." Right?
exactly. In Iowa, they're like, oh, and in New York, if you say you're going into fashion, it was like, oh, that's a good move.
Of course you
It's,
are. Right. Yeah.
But also
it's
in Iowa,
different.
your parents are like, son, people buy one suit. That's for the rest
Exactly.
of their life.
Yeah, your dad has 2 shirts, and yeah.
Did
But that's
that
exactly what it was.
did that finance background though inform your design business at all? Was there any crossover? You got to have a head for math if you could be in that business, I guess. So
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was always good at math. That was a big reason why I wanted to get into engineering, just because
right.
I used to work for my dad in the summers, and I'd work on the survey crew, and it was always about, basically angles and a lot of math constantly. So that was easy for me, and so it's been really helpful having kind of that baseline, looking at P&Ls and looking at everything together.
But then
Having that
also, did the
knowledge and
engineering
how to
and
put it together is
architecture
good.
help the construction of clothing?
Yeah, yeah, it's when I was doing sewing, and I don't sew anymore, unfortunately, but when I was doing that, I do like making things, and I was always very good at. Yeah, I used to build a lot of stuff in my dad's garage, and used to be in 4-H, which is in Iowa, which
Oh,
is kind of
sure.
like
Yeah.
I don't know what you would call it here, but 4-H you do a lot of crafts.
I don't think they call it anything
Um,
here. I grew up in Texas, so I know what 4-H is.
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, we
Yeah.
had that in Michigan as well. Were you and Dad working
yeah.
on a DeLorean that could go back in time, or to the
Do you
future?
do you still make
Wish.
any engineering projects on the weekends, or is it all closed now?
It's all closed now, but
Okay.
yeah, my dad passed about 20 years ago, and his business is still around, which is great. But yeah, it gave me the confidence, having my dad and my mom, their support. I know my dad at first was like, "You're gonna do what?" But my mom always kind of pushed me along and said, "You'll do great at whatever you want to do." And then the best thing about, like, when I was in Iowa and I was kind of like unsure, I'm going into fashion, I was moving to New York. My grandmother told me, she's like, it's great that you're doing this, and I'm like, well, thanks. And she's because your name Snyder in Dutch means tailor.
Ah,
Oh.
And I was blown away. I was like, oh my God.
You
Like,
did
it
not
gave
know
me,
that before that. That's amazing.
yeah, and technically it means cutter, which actually is more important than a tailor. A tailor just sews, a cutter actually cuts it to your body.
Right.
So they're essentially making it fit perfect for you. A tailor, simply, when you put two fabrics together, you're sewing in within like a quarter of an inch. It's pretty easy to do versus actually
The
making
shapes
it
of the
fit.
fabric that are gonna
Yeah.
make the clothes, yeah.
So anyway, when she told me that, I was, being a young kid, 20 something years old, and moving to New York and thinking, can I do this? And hearing that from your grandmother and kind of getting that a little bit of confidence helped tremendously. But it's also kind of helped, you know, you get me to where I am today, because it definitely makes me feel like that it was meant to be.
fashion is such a tumultuous industry. It's ever shifting. It's kind of hard to always have your finger on the pulse of it. Are you hopeful for the future of fashion?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always renewing itself. I mean, I don't know if you guys watched the Pharrell Louis
The
Vuitton
runway
show.
show.
It's just
Yeah.
it's whenever you think like, oh, I've seen it, there's sure enough there's something else that comes along and kind of like, becomes interesting. I think there's a lot of amazing things happening in fashion. I think everybody talks mostly about Europe, but it's really interesting having somebody like Pharrell or even Virgil when he was there before. His influence in what was happening in fashion and sneakers or what have you, and just cultural in general, was so important. Um, and it influenced everybody. I mean, it influenced me. It influenced, number of designers. You can't help but see what's happening, and then that informs and kind of, when Virgil started doing Louis Vuitton, he was the first to kind of really start showing these understated kind of tonal looks, and all of a sudden you started seeing Dior go that way, and all of a sudden you started seeing everybody, but you definitely, as soon as you think something's over and kind of boring, sure enough it gets renewed and there's something different, which is awesome.
As someone who went to school for 6 years and studied architecture, engineering, finance, and then finally fashion, how do you feel about some of the young people who are going on Project Runway out of high school, not having that education and trying to make a name for themselves overnight on the internet? Do you wince a little at or are you encouraged by that?
um a little bit of both. You know for me, I have friends, I see colleagues out there that are starting on their own, and the one piece of advice I always give them is learn as much as you can before doing it.
Mm.
I put in the time, and it's fairly easy to get noticed, and it's fairly easy to get into your first door. I was lucky enough to get into Bergdorf's and Neiman's my first season, but I had 20 years behind me. I learned as much as I could. If I had done that in my first 10 years, I would have failed. And because I wouldn't have known what a P&L was, I wouldn't have known all the things I learned from Mickey Drexler at Gap and J. Crew, I would have been successful for a year or two, and then I couldn't sustain it. And it is rare that someone can come out of the gate and dominate, but I do get encouraged by people like something Navy, who's a great influencer, who kind of started her own, she kind of built her following, and then started doing her apparel, before just launching into apparel. So I think there's a lot of ways you can come at it, and I think it's really healthy that there's always continuous flow. But I bet 5-10 years from now, not everybody's still going to be here, and it is like, how do you grow with your customer? Because you don't want to be a fad. Fads are here today, gone tomorrow. You want to have some classics and some things that are going to sustain throughout time and really kind of transcend time, and that's hard to do.
Has there been a Todd Snyder watch?
Oh, there sure has. I've got 3 of them.
Okay.
Really?
Wow.
Did we? Okay,
I sure do.
we didn't know
The
this when we
bullseye.
asked the question.
The
but,
bullseye is my favorite.
Yeah. And
Oh.
Todd, what was your first watch? Do you remember?
Well, I did it as a collaboration, with Timex. My first watch was that J. Crew. I loved old military watches, and so I sat down with their designers and created one.
I think they
then
still
when I
sell
went on
that.
my own- Yes, they do. It's a classic, and
Can you get me off that mailing list? No, I'm kidding. I buy a lot of J. Crew stuff, but I get a lot of email from them.
What was the first, like, you designed a watch, but there must have been a first moment that you encountered watches and went, oh, whoa, okay. Was there a moment like that for you when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, I love watches. It's a very dangerous passion. They're so expensive. We sell vintage watches in our store, which is really great. And then, obviously I do collaboration with Timex, and a lot of people always ask me, like, why do you do these collabs? And I know we were talking about it earlier, but for me, there's no better way than working with somebody who's been doing it for over 100 years.
Mhm.
Like, I can't reinvent a watch better than somebody else can. So why not go work and partner with a brand who really has been doing it and stood the test of time, pun intended. But it's for me, I always like doing things that are, how can I wardrobe the guy from head to toe, whether it's a sweatshirt from Champion, or whether it's a tuxedo from me, whether it's a pair of Alden shoes, whether it's a Nike sneaker. I can't do it all, obviously, and I don't think I should be doing things that are necessarily not authentic. So that's why I try to work with these brands.
Mm.
Touching upon collaboration there, I mentioned to these gentlemen, I have this overcoat that you designed in
Will
collaboration.
not shut up about the overcoat.
Yeah, he's gonna fan geek out on you now.
With a brand whose name I sometimes struggle to pronounce, Descent, I believe. Every time I wear that
That's
coat,
right.
someone has something to say about it. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of the backstory on that coat.
Yeah, Descent is an amazing brand. I discovered them. I was in a trip to Tokyo, and they have stores. They're actually Japanese owned. I think they used to be a French brand, but um, they contacted me a couple years later and said, "Would you like to do a collaboration?" I was jumped at the idea of it. They're called Descent. The stores were called Descent Blue, and they're still around. And that jacket is from that collection, and it's all, they're very much about the technical properties. That coat is seam sealed, which means it's waterproof. So if you get stuck in a downpour, you will be dry. And it was kind of a play on their technical aspects in their ski jackets, but we wanted to do this overcoat that also has like cool kind of straps. So if you get a little hot, you can kind of take the jacket off, and you don't have to like hang it over your shoulder. So it's a really great piece. But yeah, I love that you love that, because that's I always love kind of the juxtaposition of taking something that's sartorial and mixing it with active. That for me is always a fun project to work on.
Todd Snyder dresses all the cool people in the world, and our co-host. David, and he has been our guest today on the Accutron Show. He has designed for a multitude of companies, as we learned in this, and we will look for your label whenever we want to look good. Todd Snyder, thanks for being our guest today on the Accutron Show. I feel more stylish having just spent this time with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
Thanks, Todd.
appreciate it. All right, it was a pleasure. Thanks. Ian.
Thank you for listening to the Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit accutronwatch.com. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at Accutron Watch and subscribe to our podcast. From New York City, until next time, Accutron time.